beginning now. On Flint's News Talk 1470 WFNT, it's Conversations with Jason Cooper. Join Jason as he talks with elected officials, discusses the news, speaks with regular weekly guests, and much more. And now, your host, Jason Cooper.
Hey, good morning. Jason Cooper here with you on Flint's News Talk 1470 WFNT. Glad to be with you today. And we're going to go right to our guest in studio. We've got him for about a half an hour or so. And it's a makeup conversation from a couple of weeks ago. Join me in the studio. We've got Genesee County Drain Commissioner Jeff Wright. Commissioner Wright, as always, we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
You called during the break not too long ago, and there was this Detroit News article about Bill Johnson saying, hey, had Flint stayed with Detroit Water, they would have saved money versus going with the KWA. And we set up a time to talk, and I want to get to that, but a lot's been made of Governor Snyder and his response to this, and he released some new documents on Friday after releasing some emails pertaining to the Flint water issues and the decision to join up with the Carignan Water Authority. You and I have been talking about this for years. I can remember talking about it when Flint officials and the emergency manager were still deciding whether or not to kind of hook on with the KWA and all that sort of stuff. There's a Metro Times article that came out on Friday, and it says that the Michigan Department of Treasury and Emergency Manager Ed Kurtz were being advised not to join the KWA. In fact, repeatedly, I just showed you a little bit of the article. If you could, give me your comments on that, if you remember that's actually not being the case.
It certainly isn't. As a matter of fact, if you read all of the emails that were released, some of the earliest emails talked about the Tucker-Young report, which is a report that was commissioned by Lansing and Detroit to estimate how much they thought construction of the KWA pipeline would cost. Their report said it would cost us at least $440 million to complete that pipeline, the one that's 90% complete as we speak. The actual cost is $285 million. That shows you how far off they were on their estimate. It was that estimate that the original emails talked about. You can't do it for less than $440, you shouldn't do it. If you look at emails that followed that, even from the treasurer himself, Andy Dillon, you take those emails that came out later, they talked about how the Tucker-Young report, the offer from Detroit were way out of line, they weren't accurate, and that our numbers were accurate. And the proof of that is, Jason, we've bid everything, we've constructed 90% of the project, and we even beat our own estimates. So those reports and emails were based on bogus numbers in the first place. Okay. And if you follow the email trail all the way through, even the treasurer of the state of Michigan points that out ultimately, that the Detroit numbers were just not accurate.
You know, and a lot of people forget that Andy Dillon was indeed treasurer at that time. He's since left that position.
And while he was treasurer, he had sympathy with Detroit. So it's not as if he were going to not do everything that he could to try to keep Flint and Genesee County on the Detroit system. But the numbers ultimately that they were presenting just did not add up.
Well, let's stay a little bit with the Metro Times article, and then I want to talk about Detroit News and Bill Johnson or Bob Johnson. I thought it was Bob Johnson.
It's Bill Johnson.
Bill Johnson.
Bill Johnson was the one that brought it out 6-7 years ago. Same stuff. Didn't have merit then. Doesn't have merit now.
I remember interviewing him, and you called in immediately afterwards to rebuke a lot of what he said. But this Metro Times article also paints a pretty unflattering picture of you. Says that you were a former FBI informant and you've been accused of money laundering. What are your comments on that?
Well, you got a couple questions there. As far as the working with the FBI, it's absolutely true. A decade ago, we have to remember that there were tens of millions of dollars being stolen out of the Detroit water and sewer system. The people that are talked about in that article were part of that association. I was asked to participate and did so willingly, and I would do it again. We have to remember that hundreds of billions of dollars are stolen through public corruption every year or every 2 years in this country. That's our tax dollars. That's our water money. That's our sewer money. And the bottom line is I would do it again. I had no problem doing it the first time because it dealt with public corruption. As far as the absurd allegation by former prosecutor Art Bush, who has changed his tune from a decade ago when he first was involved with this investigation. In fact, I brought you a quote. I didn't know you were going to bring this up, but kind of
You
had
came
an idea.
prepared. No, I appreciate that, and you know that I'm prepared, obviously, as well, so thank you.
In an MLive article dated 5/13/10, 6 years ago, the quote from Mr. Art Bush, prosecutor at the time, was, "There was never any evidence to charge Mr. Wright." So you fast forward to just the last couple of weeks, and Mr. Bush has totally changed his tune and made an allegation of money laundering.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you'd have to ask him why 6 years or 3 or 4 years ago he said there was no evidence, and why he is changing his tune today, because I couldn't tell you why he is.
Well, let's stay, and I appreciate you answering those questions, and I didn't want to blindside you with that.
That's no problem.
And that's not the type of person I am.
I got to tell you, Jason, there's so much misinformation out there. I just
agree.
as soon talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
be clear about it. When you're a monopoly like Detroit and the Great Lakes Water Authority is on the water, they're willing to say and do anything and bring in every operative they can to try to stop Flint and Genesee County from breaking away from that monopoly.
Staying with the article, it says you and other Genesee County officials that brought up Genesee County Commissioner Jamie Curtis were worried that Flint wasn't going to join on with the KWA. But I remember our conversations going all the way back when the decision was being talked about and we were getting calls daily. You were never really worried about that. You said the KWA pipeline was going to be built whether Flint was a customer or not. Just your comments on that.
Your memory is good. At the time that it went to the Flint City Council at our demand and not to the emergency manager, the pipeline project had already set in place its first bids for its intake. There were 4 partners, Genesee, Lapeer, and Sanilac counties, and the city of Lapeer. Flint was the last one to actually come on board and sign up, but whether Flint signed up to KWA or not, the project was moving forward. The numbers just don't lie, particularly now that we have all of the projects bid and 90% construction. We're well, in fact, we're $15 million under budget from what we projected. And the reality is it saves our people huge money, would have saved our people huge money whether Flint was part of the project or not.
One other thing I took away from that article, and then we'll move away from that. In 2011, it says DTE Energy said they would be interested in purchasing untreated water from the pipeline when completed. I think 3 million gallons of water per day. And I don't remember DTE Energy in any of our conversations. I've got a lot of stuff in this memory of mine, but is that still the case? Is DTE going to be a customer?
Was that a quote from me?
No, that was a quote from the Metro Times article, and it might have been a quote from you, and we can take a look during the break.
Yeah, we could do that because I don't remember talking about that in the past.
Okay.
DTE does have a natural gas-fired facility near the pipeline.
Okay.
And it's definitely a possibility, and we'd welcome them to be part of that pipeline if they needed that water for cooling.
Okay. So Metro Times, we'll take a look at that during the break, and then we can get a little bit more clarification on that. One more less unflattering thing, Detroit television station, Fox 2, Charlie LaDuff. And
Good old Charlie.
I've met Charlie. I watched his piece. And he says some of your biggest campaign donors were awarded bids in the construction of the KWA. I want you to clarify that for our listeners.
Well, first of all, he actually came in and wanted to know why I had hired an engineering firm to run the Flint water treatment plant, was his first question. And I told Charlie that, listen, I don't have anything to do with the Flint water treatment plant. And he took that, and there's some more questions, but the way he edited it, it still made it sound like I had control over the Flint water treatment plant, which I don't. That's solely ran by the Flint operation. As far as contributions go, there are hundreds, literally hundreds of contractors, vendors, suppliers that work for my office. Very few of them give me donations for my campaign. Some do, some don't. It's not a requirement to give me campaign contributions to get work. The vast majority of the people that work for us don't. I would also clarify that all of my donations and campaign finance reports meet all state and federal requirements. So I don't really know what he was getting at other than innuendo. But there's the other thing to consider is we bid everything.
And I remember talking about the bids quite a bit.
They're all competitively bid. If somebody wants to give me a campaign contribution, I'm not going to deny it, but they only get the work if they're the low bidder.
We'll take a quick commercial break. We're joined in studio Genesee County Drain Commissioner Jeff Wright, and we're going to talk about the money because there's some confusion there. Commissioner Wright brought up misinformation, wants to clear that up. And we're going to talk about some of the money, the numbers that are being thrown out there, Detroit News articles. Everything's being looked at again with this Flint water crisis. We'll take a break with more with Commissioner Wright after this. Stick around, more conversations with Jason Cooper on Flint's News Talk 1470 WFNT. All right, Jason Cooper back with you on Flint's News Talk 1470 WFNT. Glad to be with you today. We're joined in studio Genesee County Drain Commissioner Jeff Wright. This was a makeup interview from a couple of weeks ago, so it's a little less timely than it once was, but we always appreciate Commissioner Wright coming in here and giving us some updates on what's going on with the KWA. And it's unfortunately right now it's more talked about than ever, but I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the Flint water crisis, and you called in afterwards, said, hey, you'd like to come in and talk a little bit about this. Detroit News article in which former spokesperson for the DWSD, Bill Johnson, he's been on this show before when Detroit Water and Sewerage Department trying to save the city of Flint's business. I don't know why he inserted himself in this conversation now, but he said in this Detroit News article that Flint staying with the Detroit Water would have saved them millions. And you immediately called up afterwards and said that's simply not true. Let's talk about maybe why Bill Johnson decided to insert himself in this conversation, 3 years after the fact, because I remember having him on this show.
And he talked about the exact same thing
Right.
that he's putting out today from 3 years ago. 3 years ago it had no merit. Today it has even less merit. But your question is to why.
Yeah.
I believe, in my opinion, that there's so much confusion over water now that the Detroit monopoly that they've had for 50 years, they thought it would be a good time to try to confuse the folks even further. The only thing that's changed from 3 years ago when Bill Johnson made these exact same comments that we showed 3 years ago didn't have a basis in fact, the only thing that's changed is 3 years ago, Flint and Genesee County's total water bill was $21 million that year. This year it's $32 million for the same volume of water. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing that's changed. There's still been the double-digit rate increases annually. There's still reliability issues that Detroit admits in this Bill Johnson document that a second pipeline would have to be built, but, oh, by the way, that wasn't included in the total pricing of what they were offering at the time. I think the interesting 2 points, one, they would only guarantee this questionable rate for 1 year. Detroit is infamous for getting a teaser rate out there, getting communities to sign a 30-year contract, and then immediately the following year raise their rates considerably. And I think the other one, and this is why I called, you had a gentleman from Flushing who had called in and talked about the $800 million in savings.
That's right. I forgot
and
about
no
that.
one in
You've got
Detroit,
the good memory.
yeah, $800 million in savings, and Detroit can't even explain that one because the total cost for KWA for 30 years is $725 million, and that includes construction cost, financing cost, operation cost, chemical cost, electrical cost, labor cost, etc. So if they could come up with an $800 million savings over what KWA, literally they'd have to give us free water for 30 years plus $75 million to boot. So it's factually impossible to beat the price of KWA by $800 million.
And I know we've talked about this, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head. Had the numbers not added up, then the bonds issued for the KWA would not have been rated a Best Buy.
That's correct.
Because those bonds were rated a Best Buy at one point.
That's correct.
And still are.
There have been over 5 different cost-benefit analyses done on this project. We did one through Jones and Henry. The state has done 2. There's 5, and I know of those
That's
3
okay.
immediately. Ed Kurtz did 1, the state did 1, we did 1, there was an independent one done, and they all show huge savings to the folks, the actual bill payers to this system. And, back to your original point, why bring it up now? I believe to just confuse the people even more because there's so much misinformation being put out there. And, frankly, they want to attack, I believe, the credibility of KWA, myself, and anybody involved with it. And I'd be glad to sit down with them anytime and really go over the truth of what's being said and the facts that back it up or don't back it up.
We always forget to mention, I like to try and remember to mention that Detroit had a role in all of this also. And after the decision was announced to hook on with the KWA, Detroit sent a letter to the city of Flint terminating their contract when that ended. And at that point, Flint had to scramble and maybe think about going to the Flint River as its water source. Meanwhile, you, as Genesee County Drain Commissioner, were able to negotiate a short-term deal for the county while their treatment facility is being built. So I got to remind people that Detroit played a part in this also, and that seems to be forgotten about.
It is. The papers, the ones you've pointed out to me, they never start off with the fact that Detroit terminated Flint's contract, which set in motion this move towards the Flint River. And they all try to play up Detroit as this great partner potentially. And again, I want to point out they're a monopoly and have been for 50 years with no control. I would also point out, Jason, to you and your listeners, if you think about this, Detroit literally is laughing all the way to the bank currently, and here's why. When they booted Flint off the system, they turned around and made a big deal out of the fact that the lost revenue had to be made up by the rest of the customers of the system. So they raised everybody else's rates some $15 million.
Mm-hmm.
So they're collecting that lost revenue from Flint, from all their customers. And then they turn around and collect it again from the Mott Foundation and from the state of Michigan. They're being paid twice for the same water. The reality is they could be giving the water to Flint for free because they're already collecting that revenue from all the other customers from when Flint got off the system.
How did the state not realize that?
I can't tell you, but if you look back, there were several articles talking about how they had to raise rates to cover this lost revenue.
Was it a 4% hike?
5%.
5%.
Which generated some $15+ million that they still collect to this day from the rest of the customer base.
What are your thoughts, since we're talking about Detroit Water, and it was one of the few assets that the city of Detroit, it was determined an asset for the city of Detroit as Detroit was going through its own financial emergency and ultimately ended up in bankruptcy. But now run by a regional authority made up of people from...
In name only.
In name only. Okay, because Sue
In name only.
McCormick...
Not just Sue McCormick. Sue McCormick ran the DWSD. Now she runs the Great Lakes Water Authority.
Okay.
The rate maker for DWSD now makes the rates for the Great Lakes Water Authority. The engineers for DWSD are now the engineers for the Great Lakes Water Authority. The legal counsel for the DWSD are now the legal counsel for the Great Lakes Water Authority. So it's really a change in name only and not in people.
You don't think she's going to have a little bit more pressure, though? I mean, I saw what a regional authority did for Cobo Hall down in Detroit. It was, for years, a loss on the books in the city of Detroit. And then a regional authority came in, changed it around, made some improvements, and now it does well. And it's also operated, like I said, under a regional authority. You know, I think about the people like Brooks Patterson down in Oakland County or Mark Hackle in Macomb. And I think is it Gary Brown in Wayne County, or he's on the Regional Water Authority board. You don't think things might change when you've got Brooks and Mark Hackle, a former sheriff, and all those kind of
You're going to have
peering over your shoulders?
What you've done is added another layer of bureaucracy, which costs even more. Now, can they improve the situation for the folks? Hopefully. But the reality is, what they assumed was over $5 billion in debt off the Detroit books and took it on to the suburbs books. And with the capital improvements that are necessary to the system and the labor and other costs involved, we certainly can't see how they're going to be able to stop these high rate increases for this next several years.
Something that caught my eye during that Charlie LaDuff piece, you had a map in your office kind of showing the pipeline, and then you had the Detroit pipeline there also, it looked like on that same map. And it looked like the Detroit pipeline piped directly to Flint and then shot down to Detroit, so kind of like a T-shape. Am I wrong in saying that was kind of the... how that pipe is created?
The Detroit pipeline, that's almost 50 years old, and that's
Okay.
another thing to remember.
The age.
The age of the existing pipeline actually has a T in Imlay City that goes down to Macomb and Oakland County.
Okay.
And then a stub that comes over to the city of Flint and Genesee County.
Because that was one of their arguments, that they had to pipe water, or they had to bring water to Flint.
They don't push water up from Detroit. It comes from Lake Huron, not 4 miles from where our
But
pipeline.
that was one of their arguments.
I understand it
Yeah.
was their argument, but it's not based in fact.
Okay. Well, that was something I wanted to clear up. It just caught my eye since we were talking about it. Let's talk a little bit about the KWA construction before we let you go. Still on target for completion this summer.
This last couple of weeks has slowed things down a little bit, the extreme cold weather and the snow, but we're confident that if we don't have any worse weather than we've had, that June, July of this year, the KWA pipeline will be complete. The pumping stations are already complete. The intake are already complete. We're about 90% complete. So weather permitting, yes, KWA will be available June, July of this year.
And just to reaffirm, it's still under budget from what it was
Way under budget.
believed to
Our
be.
capital costs were estimated at $300 million. I'm very confident that it's going to come in at about $285 million, because the contingencies that are in all these projects just wasn't there. The engineers, the contractors, the people that worked on this project all did a great job. So the unforeseen is usually what causes a lot of additional monies to be spent. So the testing, the engineering, the surveying that was all done to get ready for this project was done to such a depth that the unforeseen or the contingencies just didn't need to be used as in some projects. I would use the jail down in Wayne County. Because Mr. Ficano's written in some of these articles also about how...
I actually haven't seen his name, but...
He wrote a letter to the editor of the Free Press talking about how the Great Lakes Water Authority may have been better for Flint. But Mr. Ficano was in charge of a jail that was only supposed to cost $150 million.
Right.
Ended up being $285 million, wasn't even finished.
No, yep.
They figured it'd take $400 million to finish it, so they just shut the whole project down.
Yeah, and they're trying to sell
Our
that
project
property.
is not like that. Our project is under budget. We are proud of that, and I give a lot of credit to the staff, the engineers, and the contractors that made that happen. And the bottom line is, and I'll sit down with any detractor or naysayer and show them, compare the facts. The KWA brings the highest quality, lowest cost water to the people of Flint and Genesee County of all the options. And that's why they can't really fight us on those facts. And that's why they're starting to become personal attacks, not only on me, but others and the KWA.
Two more quick questions before we let you go. Any pressure from the state to speed up the process a little bit? And I know a lot has been talked about making sure the city of Flint is ready for KWA water. And we've talked in the past, Flint's going to be the first customer to receive the water from
Possibly.
the KWA.
The state's not pressured us to move any faster. I think what the state has concerns over, and rightfully so, and the EPA and our office, is to make sure that Flint is ready for the KWA water. And what I mean by that is that their treatment plant and their staff and the people that run that plant are ready. I believe that the KWA will be available to Flint before Flint's ready to actually treat it.
Really?
As a matter of fact, I'll go to a quote from Harvey Hollins, the point man for Lansing,
Yes.
Governor Snyder. He made the statement last week that they probably would need more money from Lansing to buy Detroit water until November of this year, because it would take that long to get the plant certified by EPA, DEQ, etc.
Just the plant, not the pipes?
Just the plant, that's
Okay.
correct. And that's when I realized, well, why are they asking the state for more money and potentially the Mott Foundation when they're already being paid for that water anyhow?
Someone needs to get that more out there, and hopefully our conversation helped do that. Commissioner Wright, we certainly appreciate you taking the time.
Anytime.
I want to point out, people can see this quick facts on the Carignondi website, or is it on the Drain Commissioner's
website? It's on the Carignondi website, KAREGNONDI, Carignondi.
And that's the correct way.
.com.
Carignondi.com. That's the correct way to pronounce it, because it seems like everybody's butchering the name. And that's what I've been pronouncing it the past few years. Carignondi, not
Yes.
Carignondi.
That's correct.
Okay, just making sure. Genesee County Drain Commissioner Jeff Wright, we appreciate you coming in
Thanks for
and
having me.
talking to us, and we'll look forward to future conversations.